Okay, pride. We start with pride. You remember this is Hieronymus Bosch's image from his painting of 1500. There is little debate about it. Pride is seen as the worst, the most reprehensible of the 7 deadly sins. The argument of some Christian writers in the Middle Ages is that while the other sins nibble at your being, pride consumes all of it. It is first, not only in the sense of being worst, in terms of being the sin that if you've committed too much of this, that you have the most penance to do in purgatory, or you're most damned, if you like, if you go to hell. It's also first in the sense that for some writers, beginning with Evagrius, but also Gregory the Great and Cassian, pride corrupts you so that all the other sins creep in. It's not the same. Some thinkers make gluttony is the first and so on. But certainly for later theologians, pride is the one that begins all of the problems. All of your problems begin with pride, precisely because it is this moment of branching off, of turning away from what you should be doing, cultivating yourself when you should have been cultivating the other, or the community, or your relationship with God. Okay, we're going to look at 4 things this week, 4 topics in this particular lecture. As you know, there are 2 lectures. I hope I'm going to do it in time. I know sometimes you run out of time. I don't know how you manage to listen to 90 minutes of lecture without, doing something else. But it seems to work. We will stop and have a chat at some point. We're going to look at pride in modern psychology and self-help. We're going to begin with the modern definition of pride. After all, I think we should have some tension. If we're looking for something unique in the Middle Ages, we should know what that unique thing is. We should also interrogate our current assumptions about what pride is. So we're going to start with that. We're going to move on to Lucifer, look at Lucifer in medieval culture. Lucifer, the Prince of Pride. Lucifer, who has a tortured and difficult relationship in Christian theology. He's not always there, quite simply. Lucifer is a character who grows in prominence as the Middle Ages grow. And to the period of the Black Death, Lucifer and Satan are very, very important characters. For Dante, Satan is an important character, less so in the early tradition. We're going to look at the evolution of Lucifer and what it can tell us about how pride is being thought about as a sin. Then we're going to look at the medieval intellectual foundations for evaluating pride as sin. This is where we get into a little bit of hardcore theology to understand from St. Paul, Augustine, other thinkers, what pride is intellectually. If we're seeing these exciting new depictions of Lucifer, if we're seeing pride morphing through this creation of the devil as a character who has some role in all of your lives, what are the intellectual foundations of that change? And also, we're going to learn something quite surprising about what pride means, I think, through that. And then finally, we're going to do an analysis of hubris. We're going to do a genealogy of hubris from 1200 to 2020, which is good. So it's ambitious for an hour and a half, especially because I've already wasted loads of minutes. All right, well, let's see how we go. Okay, let's begin with modern definitions of pride. And there's this essential tension, which I'm sure you're aware of, that it can mean 2 things. It can be good or bad. It's split. In fact, if I say the word pride, I'm sure the first thing that comes into your head is not the damnation of Lucifer or something like that. I mean, what is the first thing you think of? Pride. Some positive things, maybe? Alina, what's coming into the head?
Like the basic definition of I'm proud of my work, or like I'm proud of who I am, or something like that.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm proud of my work. I'm proud of who I am. These are positive things, I hope. They're not like, I'm proud of who I am and I hate myself for it because I'm damned. Mariam?
I think where we're going with this is that it's not as bad as it seems like. It's the foundation of all the sins and like it's horrible. Like it doesn't seem like that to me at least.
Okay, exactly, right. So here's a tension then. If pride is commonly seen as a good thing, if we commonly use the word pride and all of our associations are, positive, uplifting, the very meaning of our existence, like, I take pride in things. Like I'm proud of, as I said earlier, I'm proud of my daughter if she learns how to, open a door on her own. Actually, no, I was also upset by that.
make my life harder. No, look, you're proud when things happen that are good in your life. You might be proud in the workplace if you sell more cars than everyone else this month. I don't know, that's a kind of example. Now, is it the case that, we're looking at a historical shift where the primary association of this term, whether it be superbia or pride, is one, negative to positive? I don't think it's so simple, and in fact, we're going to see the split played out throughout Western history. But generally speaking, I looked at psychologists from the present day and what they say about pride. And generally speaking, it's quite interesting, this particular article, pride, when representing an appropriate response to actual performance, constitutes a functional social emotion with important implications for leadership and the building of social capital. I suppose it's a way of saying, well, taking pride in something like your work or your achievements or whatever, this is a good thing. Scientifically, it constitutes a functional social emotion, important implications, allows you to build better social relations, allows you to perform better as a social being. So it's quite positive for concrete, scientific, sociological, psychological reasons. It allows you to build relationships, be successful with others. Notice there, when representing an appropriate response to actual performance. And this really is the split in pride as it exists as a modern concept in psychology, sociology. Is this distinction between, and this is not John Tangley, our previous employee, although I would love to know what he would say about this topic. This is a different J. Tangley. I think John's initial was P as well, it's strange. This is a different J. Tangley, writing in 1990. Makes a simple distinction, which I think you will all recognise, between what Tangley calls alpha pride and beta pride. Alpha pride, and we have Narcissus here, is that pride in yourself as self. That pride in you yourself. I am proud of me, and all that is me, I am proud of. It's sometimes referred to as a global sense of pride. Beta pride, and here we have a doctor who's proud of the qualification, proud of the work they do. Beta pride is about your behaviour. I'm proud of this aspect of behaviour that I've engaged with or I've done. I'm proud of what I've done. So quite simply, I'm proud of who I am versus I'm proud of what I've done. That's one distinction. Now, there's no necessary moral aspect here. Let's go back. There's not necessarily a moral gloss. It's not like alpha pride is wicked and beta pride is virtuous. There will be some pathologization, as you'll see in a second. But for the moment, let's just take the distinction: proud of self, proud of behaviour. This is developed by Lewis in his book on shame, a good book on shame, to a distinction between pride and hubris. And this is one I'm sure that you're familiar with. The idea that, and we can extend this idea of pride in self versus pride in behaviour. If we take a sporting analogy, pride in your activity. So pride as something which is an appropriate response to some behaviour that you've engaged with, but which also recognises the role of others. Pride is proportionate, in other words. So, for example, if you're a Formula One driver, I have this here because it's the Russian Grand Prix tomorrow, so it's fun and topical. But here is an example. Formula One is obviously a complicated sport where, if you are the Mercedes driver Lewis Hamilton and you win every race, which he does at the moment, if he says, I did it all myself, I'm brilliant at driving a car and that's why I'm winning, it's not proportionate to what's really happening, because you see how big these Formula One teams are, like 500 members, and you know that the way he's able to drive around that track depends on all of the components that were built by these guys and all of the speed with which they put his tyres on. So pride you can still be proud, but notice in an image like this, it's the Mercedes logo that they're proud of, not necessarily we're all proud of Lewis. Hubris, on the other hand, is the tendency for Lewis and others to see yourself as the reason why all things go well. It's an overweening commitment to your own brilliance. And of course, I've chosen Cristiano Ronaldo as an example of this, if only because of one of his quotes: not all of my free kicks are successful, but then even God is not always perfect, which is just a great quotation. I'm not saying that Ronaldo is hubristic, but it might be an interesting analogy. Now, why is this pathological? For Lewis, this is quite interesting. Because what's the difference, okay? Is there a negative connotation? Well, he's precise and scientific about it. Global feelings of pride which is kind of like hubris, are highly reinforcing yet difficult to sustain. As a consequence, hubristic individuals are inclined to distort and invent situations to recreate the transient emotion. So, in this very 21st or 20th century view of pride and hubris, here comes the pathology. The pathology is not, oh, this means that you're damned to hell, you're a sinner, you're going to let gluttony into your life if you do this. It's quite specific and scientifically couched. Hubristic, you're going to start distorting and inventing situations to recreate it. In other words, the problem with hubris from a scientific, pathological point of view is that it's not sustaining. It doesn't work. It doesn't work, and it will break your psychology thereby. And of course, this has a social ramification too. I'm quite interested in self-help books here, trying to think about how these concepts fit into contemporary ideas of the self and what we should be. Now, I don't think we should take, this too seriously, in a sense, like, I know these books are designed, they're popular literature. You can't compare them to Augustine's City of God. And I know that there is wisdom in these books. I don't want to trash them. This is one called You Are a Badass, How to Stop Doubting Your Greatness and Start Living an Awesome Life by Jen Sincero. I'm not just putting this here to knock it down. I want to show that actually the idea of pride and hubris and the tension between the two is actually quite curious in the modern world, and it needs more of our exploration. But anyway, just at the basic level, just a quick look at the start of this book. Deep down, she describes her own journey to being brilliant. Deep down, I knew I was a total rock star, that I had the power to give and receive and love with the best of them, and I could leap tall buildings in a single bound and could create anything I put my mind to. And so a lot of these books begin with, like, the idea is, you are already brilliant, believe in yourself, which kind of sounds a bit like global pride. It's not like I do brilliant things. Understand that you do brilliant things. At least from the surface appearance, a lot of these books begin, look at the title, You Are a Badass. You're already good. You just need to get rid of the things that get in your way. So if we were going to have like a really simple view of this, we say, okay, well, this is just hubris and pride legitimized. It's not a pathology, because it doesn't matter what your relations with other people are. It's going to work. It's going to make you a more successful writer, creative, worker, whatever. But it's not so simple. And actually, as I look through this book, I start to see something that looks a little bit more like a medieval idea of pride, or maybe something that fits in with this distinction between pride and hubris. While she's telling you this in the self-help book, there's also the admission that you cannot be perfect, really, because you've obviously been screwing things up until now. Stay open, or else you are screwed, she says. I mean it. This is really important. You've gotten to where you are right now by doing whatever it is you're doing. So if you're less than impressed with your current situation, you clearly need to change things up. So, thinking about pride and pathology, there's humility here, I see, the opposite of pride. Be humble about the fact that you're not perfect. It's not like other things are getting in your way. There's also a toxic element of yourself that's getting in your way, and this book is trying to help you. We can think about this as a way to organize this difficult tension between what is pride and what is hubris, what is pathological pride and what is a productive pride, if you like. Where does it become bad or immoral or corrosive? Later on in this lecture, I'm going to go back to this image here, because this is a curious enigma from, right now, 21st century ideas of pride. What does it mean to be proud? When is it not appropriate to be proud? When is humility more appropriate? What is the tension between these two? This image of the NFL player who, in protest against police brutality, particularly against black people, chose to kneel in the national anthem rather than stand, as you see this gentleman doing with his hand on his heart. So what versions of pride do we have here? Pride in nation, pride to be American. Is this not proud to be American? Is this a different kind of pride? Or is this a critique of a certain kind of corrosive pride? Is this the humility answer to the modern pathological pride? We'll come back to that later. First, we need to dive into the Middle Ages, and we need to dive into Lucifer. So, a study of the devil. What do we know about the devil? Generally, guys, I mean, he has an interesting history. The word in Greek, diabolos, just means adversary. And this is a tension, right, in all of Christian theology. Who is this devil? He only appears once in the Old Testament, I think, in the book of Job. And in the New Testament, he appears in 2 of the Gospels, the temptation of Jesus. From there, however, the imagination runs wild in Christian art, in Christian poetry, culture, in other new apocryphal testaments that are written, apocryphal books to the Bible. Lucifer grows, and I wonder if as Lucifer grows and declines, we can see something in the growth and decline of a certain idea of pride. Because after all, Lucifer's great sin, as you know, was his pride. What does that mean? We talked about Lucifer last week, briefly. Sculptures like these, this is not medieval, but they're good for leading us into a situation where we can understand what Lucifer represents. It's important that we remember that Lucifer and the devil in the Christian tradition that begins in the Middle Ages represents someone who was beautiful, who was more beautiful than the other angels, and someone who, through that beauty, believed themselves to be, as Jen Sincero would say, a rock star, a badass, whatever these awful words are. Someone who believed themselves to be, very specifically, as powerful, maybe more powerful than God, an alternative God. This is the origin of Lucifer, and the origins of the sin of Lucifer, therefore, are in that level of magnified self-belief. But the origins of Satan, if we actually want to look at the artwork, the very first kinds of representations of the devil, of Satan, this tension is not so clear-cut. Satan seems to be, we don't get so much of the beauty of Satan on the one hand. We don't get the full range of his attractiveness as a potential other to Christianity. This is the Stuttgart Psalter from the 9th century. And here is Satan. This is actually, I think, one of the very first. The very first is a mosaic from Ravenna that we have. I didn't have a slide for that, where Satan just appears to be an angel. Here we see the beginnings of this other tradition of Satan as, I think it's fair to say, sexualized, monstrous figure. Serpent maybe serving a double role in association with sexuality. Muscular, naked. Don't ask me what Jesus is doing here. This is not. You have to read the Gospels. It's legitimate. It's just a strange representation, and of course, let's not dwell on the Stuttgart Psalter too much. But this is one way that Satan is represented. Later in the Middle Ages, this becomes much more monstrous and much larger, much more animalistic. This is from the Florence Baptistry from the 1280s. This is the kind of image, incidentally, that Dante may have seen before making his own Satan in the Inferno. It does bear a vague resemblance, actually more than a vague resemblance to Dante's Satan. I suppose the problem with the devil really is, in Christian theology, is the central problem. What is the role of evil? Where does evil come from? What is evil? By which we also understand what is sin. Why is there any sin at all? Why is there any evil at all? So why did God create the devil? If God created the heavens and the earth and everything that's in it, well, why is there the devil? Did he create this deliberately? Now, the problem beneath all of this goes back beyond Christianity to this idea that there are two forces in the universe, a good force and an evil force, and that they both have their own Lord and Master. And as I already discussed last week, this is a problem for Christians because this makes out that there are two gods, as if there's only one thing we need to know about Christianity is there's one God. Right, three people of the Trinity, one God. But there's, so this is a problem. Is Satan made monstrous and enormous like this, with his horns, commanding the kingdom of the underworld, a kind of other God? And this is a tension. That's why maybe he's suppressed in the earlier period. Theologians like Augustine solve this problem by saying, well, actually, evil is not a force channeled by one particular being like the devil. Evil is an absence. You might remember this from great books, Augustine. Remember, Yevgeny Grishin did this really well for me. He once explained it. He just punctured a hole in a piece of paper and said, that's evil. It's the absence. It's the absence of good. So this is a way of explaining evil, sin, pride, everything else, by saying it's not a force of its own, it's just the loss of something. If true existence is being with God, And that's what a good community is. That's what a good, healthy individual is. Evil is when you start to lose that. You don't gain something new, you just lose it. You could see it as becoming more animal, becoming less human. You are less human. If you imagine a being that just looks after its own interests, that just goes after its own, this is like the lowest form of animal, apparently. I don't know, I have a lot of respect for animals, but I don't know, I think apparently worms do not do much for their community. This is like one idea of evil. Okay, how does Lucifer progress then? And there's always this tension, by the way. We don't want to make Lucifer too powerful seeming, then it seems a bit like Manichaeanism, the idea that he's a separate god. Well, later, I suppose, in the 12th century, throughout the medieval period, Lucifer does become more prominent. He does become more of a separate figure of power. Here's an image from, this is a fresco, I think. The Maester is now in the Frick collection, so it can't be a fresco, it must be a painting. But you can't really see it's too dark, but here's Satan, obviously with his bat wings, being cast away by Christ. With Dante, maybe we can solve this enigma of what is the devil, what is his pride, in the sense that, on the one hand, Dante gives us the biggest, fullest, most powerful representation of Satan that we've had in the Middle Ages, up to this point. As Dante describes Satan, he's right at the bottom of Inferno. He is in ice. You remember Dante goes with the old legend that Satan had been cast out of heaven. Dante advances this legend for his pride, right? By saying that, I told you this already, he made a hole in the earth through Jerusalem, disrupted a mound of earth. That mound of earth, the impact was so enormous that Satan himself went to the very center of the earth. And all of the earth that was moved by that shock then jutted out at the other end of the earth, the other end of the planet, down where Australia is. They didn't know that was where Australia is, and caused a mountain, which is Mount Purgatory. Anyway, Satan is at the bottom. He is, there was some calculation done by, Dante says, well, compare him to this height, to this height, to this height. That's how big it was. It's apparently around about 2,000 feet tall. That's how big Satan is. That's how much bigger than the Schlumberger building is that. No, it's enormous, right? 2,000 feet tall, skyscraper size. He's immobile in ice. He has 3 faces, as you can see here, with which he's devouring 3 individuals. Judas here, betrayer of Jesus, also Cassius and Brutus, the betrayers of Julius Caesar, which is significant, incidentally, because Dante, and this is why we might understand what pride means for Dante, what the pride of Lucifer, why it's so important. Lucifer is the one who betrayed God. It's that betrayal that's so important. It's that believing that you know better and so betraying your master. The pride of wanting to usurp authority, in other words, like the pride of thinking, I could be the real king, or I could be the real president, or whatever. For Dante, that's really important. That's why I think we have, it's not just religious betrayal, it's very importantly secular betrayal. These guys betrayed Julius Caesar. Just like Satan, they thought that they knew better how to run a government. They thought they could usurp authority and take it over for themselves in the Roman Republic, or the Roman Empire. This is significant for Dante. I think Lucifer stands as the one who would dislodge the kingdom itself. Dante is obsessed with the idea of legitimacy in terms of the empire. He dreams of a new emperor who would be, basically replace the Pope almost, I think, in Dante's mind, as supreme ruler of Christendom. The idea of an illegitimate ruler for Dante is at the center of his idea of what the good Christian life is. It must have a good Christian leader at the top. To betray that leader is the height of pride. Pride is the sin for Dante. Pride and betrayal that comes with it are the sins at the heart of the coldest part of the universe, the bottom of the Inferno. Just a line from Canto 34, which is where you can find Lucifer. If he was as fair as he is hideous now, and raised his brow in scorn of his creator, he is fit to be the source of every sorrow. Just a reminder, Lucifer and his pride are the source of all ill in the world for Dante. very briefly, this tradition continues. It becomes a little bit more fun after Dante. Dante's a pretty dark image of Lucifer. A more fun one is the York plays. These are mystery plays, we call them, where different guilds get together and perform parts of biblical folklore or biblical scripture in plays. Lucifer is in the very first play, the Barker's play of the York cycle. This is written in the 14th century, around about 1376. It was first performed, first manuscript a bit later. All the mirth, this is Lucifer speaking, all the mirth that is made is marked here in me. The beams of my brightness are burning so bright, and so seemly in sight myself now I see. Like a lord am I left here to dwell in this light. Much fairer by far than these here. To my beauty they cannot compare. I feel I'm so fresh and so fair. My power surpasses each peer. This, if you just wanted one quote, this is pride. This is the pride of Lucifer, right? Believing that his own light is lighter than the light of God. Again, if you're allergic to the word God, he believes that his own efforts and abilities and light and brilliance much superior to those of those around him, the community, the other things which populate his universe. My power surpasses each peer. And this is where the problem of pride often stems in medieval thought. It's that problem of believing you're better than others, right? Of comparing yourselves with others. That's Lucifer. I just thought I'd note that there is a contemporary I don't know whether it's any good or not. I only watched a little bit. But TV series called Lucifer. You know, how much has the idea of Lucifer changed? Not so much. He's not 2,000 feet tall. He hasn't got 3 faces. He's not stuck in ice. He's in Los Angeles. But, you know, still this idea of the smooth, charming figure. In the very first scene, he charms a police officer and says, he bribes him, he gives him money and says, you know, he's speeding. Officer wants to give him a ticket. Lucifer offers him all this money and says, you know, you like this, you want this, you've done bad things, we all do bad things, take it, take the money. And he tempts in this way, believing that you don't need to follow by the rules, but also being charming and having a certain kind of radiance which, you know, corrupts. That's Lucifer in the modern world. Maybe you could do some of that for your portfolios, it's up to you. Okay, any questions so far? You with me with Lucifer? Not with me with Lucifer, we're not with Lucifer, but you know, you get, right, okay. Any questions about Lucifer can follow, and we will be talking about him in our seminar. We'll look at how Hildegard of Bingen, who's a 12th century nun and writer and polymath, she writes about Lucifer, so you can start to think about how what she's written fits into this general picture, okay, when we discuss in our next session. Let's look at the intellectual foundations of all this. Okay, so it's all very well that Dante and other poets have written all these wonderful things about Lucifer. They've made this exciting literary tradition. Where does it come from? And I'm going to introduce you to 4 different kind of thoughts, thinkers, schools of thought. Okay, and we're going to go through them one by one. You probably recognise the 2 figures, maybe, I don't know. Or at least you can guess. If we're going to talk about sin in the medieval world, or sin in Christianity rather, there's one place that we have to start. Actually, when we talk about anything in Christianity, there's one person we have to start with. The inevitable bearded figure of St. Paul. St. Paul of Tarsus, we discussed him last week. Foundational. I think we should, it's easy to forget that Christianity was very nebulous when it began. It's not something like Islam, where we have the Quran from one prophet, then dictated. Okay, one scripture, unimpeachable. It's the word of God through Muhammad. Christianity does not begin like that, of course. It's one man's life, which is then written about by others. And who are the right ones to write about it? Well, there are lots of other gospels. It's a debatable tradition, but St. Paul obviously places the cap on it. The writings of St. Paul, on the one hand, they do a lot to interpret the otherwise nebulous, otherwise difficult to pin down life of Jesus. Paul is like the first interpreter. But he also invents a lot of stuff, guys. He basically invents Christian theology in a meaningful sense. What does he say about pride and sin? Well, it's quite interesting. If we look at 2 of his letters, the Corinthians, I will not boast about myself except from my weaknesses, the Lord said to me. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. So the point is, right, Paul begins by saying he resists boasting. boasting is a problem. Actually, Paul often says he has a lot to boast about. He could boast about loads of great things that he's done, which is interesting. It's a kind of, isn't that a humble brag, or what is it? I don't know. He's all still boasting. But anyway, but he doesn't, he says, for Christ's sake, I delight in my weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. And this is a crucial intellectual plank for understanding all of this idea of sin, of pride, the sin of pride. This idea that in your weakness you are strong. That true strength is not having your own individual strength. It's accepting that there is a higher strength, God's strength, which you participate in. Pride is when you think that you can do it for yourself. Pride for Paul is like believing that you yourself got yourself to where you are, but really, actually, you should be weak and recognise. And he's quite complex about this. Maybe another quotation will help. Remember, these are letters written to people trying to persuade them to the Christian life. If someone else thinks they have reasons to put confidence in the flesh, I have more. You see, here he is boasting again, by the way, while saying he's not boasting. For zeal, persecuting the church, and for righteousness based on the law, I am faultless. He's faultless, okay? He's saying he's faultless, okay? So he's saying, like, you know, he should have, if anyone's going to boast about their achievements, it should be Paul, because he's done the most to help Christianity grow, the most, and it's true, he's right. This is not empty boasting. But, he says, but whatever gains were to me, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. What is this distinction? This important distinction, is it for you or for Christ that you have your achievements? This is one that arguably continues today. What is more, I consider everything a loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whose sake I have lost all things. What does this mean? Can anyone interpret this passage or give us a reading of it? Who's on the verge of speaking? On Zoom, you never know, but in reality, like, there's sometimes a flicker of a leg, and you know someone's about to. Which is none of you. All right, that's fair enough. Everyone was dead still when I said that. But does anyone want to offer a reading? Yeah.
Just want me to read that.
Or like an interpretation.
I mean. Here Paul says, even this. So Paul here says that because he knows that Jesus Christ is the one who gave him all the things, he cannot take pride in those things anymore in some way. I mean, it's not coming from him. It's not something that he did, actually. It's been given to him by Jesus. So it's kind of a loss of all those things for him right now. I mean, that's fine.
You're absolutely right. Is the problem here then... Oh, Mariam, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just remember the idea of the more you suffer, the closer you are to God. Something like that. And I just was wondering, has anything to do with this passage, because I think the crucial point is like, but whatever were gains to me, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. It's like the idea of being proud means you are more powerful than God, and like for the sake of not being proud, you need to deny that idea and propose the opposite, which is like God is more powerful than me.
Yeah, the tension comes. You're right, Mariam, and the tension comes in. Well, why is it a loss? If it's for you, why is it a loss for Christ? Why is there that distinction? Why is it not a gain for me? Like, you know, he's talking after all about, you know, being righteous or maybe even like preaching for the church. Why is that a loss? If that's a gain for him, why is it not also a gain for God? Why is there a distinction between this is a gain for me and therefore a loss for God? And why is it not the same?
Question maybe like my modern ways of approaching things get in the way. I don't think these things should cancel each other out. But apparently they do. I don't know why. That's a good question.
What opens up here is the idea that pride really is a thought. As Evagrius Ponticus taught us, it's one of the generic thoughts, that it is a thought, a sin in thought, which is to say, starting to believe that there's a distinction. It was for me, really, that these achievements were mine, they're for me. Yes, and also God, but for me, that's the problem. And so maybe Paul is trying to get us to think, or he's trying to get the Philippians to think, just always remember, foremost, it is for God, and do not think about whether it's for you or not. And this is a challenge for us. Remember, the other thing about this, of course, is it leaves itself open to interpretation, which is no surprise, because we know that the next 1,000 years of Christianity, more than that, the next 2,000 years are all about how do you interpret any of this stuff. And there are a million different views of what this really means practically. And of course, that's what makes so much variety in Christian life later on. Okay, but with Paul, we just get this general. I like what you also say, Mariam, about this idea about by suffering I attain some achievement. Jesus in the Gospels, the Sermon on the Mount, Sermon on the Plain, has that one. Happy are the meek, for they'll inherit the earth. Happy are those who weep, because they'll come to laugh. There's that idea. Well, it's good that you suffer now. But this is a problem, isn't it? And of course, you can be proud about how much you're suffering, can't you? I'm much better at suffering than you are. I'm much better at being miserable than you are. But this does come up. It does come up. Anyway, we'll get there. All right. That's enough of Paul. Let's go next to the next great interpreter. And you'll know his name, obviously. Well, we all read him in great books, Augustine of Hippo. Like Paul, really, insofar as there is a Christianity, there are like 3 or 4... The building blocks of Christianity are just laid by these successive figures of enormous importance who basically define what all these things mean for everyone. And so in 1,000 years after Augustine dies, people are still saying, I know it's true because Augustine said it was true, which is their humility, by the way. And that's how significant Augustine becomes, right? He becomes like another gospel almost. Anyway, Augustine writes about pride, and he really, really cements home. There are a few things that Augustine really cements in the Christian tradition. One, we'll see with lust. Augustine is obsessed with his own lust, and consequently, makes that like really important in the Christian tradition. But pride is the other one. Here, of course, represented is that moment of temptation when Eve takes the fruit from, and there's Lucifer again in his form, from the serpent. Temptation. Now, what is that temptation? This has been described as gluttony, right? Eve, she just wants this extra, food that she doesn't need. Imagine, again, we said how horrible for this to be gluttony for an apple. It's so... it could also be what? Avarice, maybe not, maybe. Envy, I don't know. She just wants to destroy things. I know that if I eat this, everything will be terrible. And that's good because, I don't know. It could be a lot of sins. But for Augustine, this is really a moment of pride, as he describes it. And what is the origin of our evil will but pride? For pride is the beginning of sin. And what is pride but the craving for undue exaltation? And this is undue exaltation when the soul abandons him to whom it ought to cleave as its end and becomes a kind of end to itself. This happens when it becomes its own satisfaction. So you may not see it, I may not see it, but for Augustine, this is a classic moment of pride, desiring your own exaltation. After all, it was the forbidden fruit, the fruit of knowledge. There was some sense of betterment of self in this original sin. But either way, this is for Augustine really important. Undue exaltation, the soul abandons. So again, it's turning away for Augustine. I think that's all kind of self-explanatory. One thing to sort of, flesh it out a bit is, this comes in the City of God, where Augustine describes 2 cities, City of God, City of Man. It's Platonic, this City of God. It's not really, bricks, mortar, city. It's the coming imagined city, right? Which should be in our hearts. It's like a Platonic ideal of a city. Well, yes, it's related to that idea, definitely. Augustine didn't read Plato, as you might remember. He read people who read Plato, but he Christianizes Plato, the idea that the truth will come after death in the ideal kingdom. This works really well with Plato. But anyway, so it's just important to note that pride is, part of the city of man, guided and fashioned by a love of self. If there's love in both cities, if you're going to build a city and it's all going to be about yourselves, then you've got the city of man. If you start to build a city that is really guided and fashioned by love of God, whatever that might look like, I suppose it's making a city for communal relations where we think what is best for God, what is best for the community. That's a city of God. This can be politicized, interestingly. Yes, Anne?
If in the city of God it's God and fashioned in order to please the God, wouldn't it be more like God and fashioned by the love for God and not of God?
Yeah, we have an of there, don't we? Yes, I don't see the distinction being that big in the sense that love of God, love for God.
Love of God means, as far as I understand, is that God loves us and loves people who live in this city and work here. And love for God means that those people love God and God doesn't owe them anything. Oh,
I see. Well, it's definitely reciprocal for Augustine. It's a love which is mutual. God loves us for Augustine, and the problem is that we don't love him, we turn away. God's the unrequited lover somehow, who's like, if only you'll answer my text messages, I love you, you're just ignoring me, you're not praying. So I guess that's kind of what's happening here. There should be a union. What does it mean, though? It's obviously vague, guys. It's obviously very, very vague. Imagine if you say, right, we are going to build the city of God. We're going to do it. Augustine has given us a plan. It's not a good plan. It's not like a really, really foolproof plan with costings and everything. Obviously, it's extremely poetic, metaphorical. But really, if there is something precise, it's about orienting a community morally is what produces the city of God. So fighting the 7 deadly sins, for example, purging all your community of pride being the highest priority among those, that would be how we would build a city of God. So only precise when it comes to things like moral issues, not precise when it comes to what does this look like politically. What does a political entity that has love of God as its guidance and its fashioning look like? No one's ever answered the question. Let's leave Augustine there and turn to an unexpected thinker, one of my favourite thinkers of the Middle Ages, Hugh of St. Victor. I suppose we would call him one of the first university scholars. Hugh, this is the Abbey of St. Victor in Paris, is now destroyed. Interesting character insofar as he's not really a monk. He does do a lot of the things monks do, like he obeys a rule, he obeys a strictness of comportment and dress, but he also preaches and teaches, so he's kind of half monk, half university professor. He writes about the sins, and this is where he gets obsessive. He writes this thing called On the 5 Sevens, and it's just like, if you're interested in numerology, all the numbers stacking up, it's just crazy. For our purposes, it's quite interesting that he keeps the 7 deadly sins from Gregory the Great. He doesn't have sloth, he has sadness, tristitia. But anyway, for Hugh, it's, pride is still the deadliest of the sins. We say that pride takes God away from a person. Pride is the love of one's own status. Let's get back to that quote. When a soul loves the good that it has on its own, that is, without him from whom he accepted the good. He has a very good metaphor to help us understand this, which I like. O destructive pride, why are you suggesting to a small stream that it should separate itself from its source? Why are you suggesting to a ray that it should turn itself away from the sun? Maybe that helps with this love for, love of God dilemma. I like this though, the stream. The stream is a powerful, let's say we have a powerful stream, which is, flowing with lots of water, there are fish in it, I don't know. Pride for Hugh is saying we don't need this big river, we're going to carry on being a brilliant stream on our own. So I can't help but think about political developments in my own country. But it's cutting that off and not realizing that was the source of your water. For Hugh, this is a way of understanding pride. It's cutting off the source, like a ray of a sunbeam. I want to be a sunbeam that exists on my own as the brightest beam, but you were of the sun in the first place, as we all know. There's no sunbeam without the sun. I think, Mariam, you can ask a question.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I interpret it as like pride being a very humane thing, like it's a part of us, is what he's trying to say.
That it's a humane thing, it's part of us. Well, I think Hugh is not suggesting that it's diabolical, that it's part of an evil force, pride. I think he's accepting that it can happen, that we're humans, and that these things can happen. We turn away. Lovers sometimes turn away momentarily. These things do happen, right? But for Hugh, maybe that's where the love metaphor doesn't work so well, but for Hugh, you must turn back. You must accept. But actually, it seems to be more drastic, doesn't it, from this metaphor?
It's more democratic in a sense.
Possibly. I'll tell you what, this might help. Hugh, and this is where the numbers become crazy. Why are there 5 sevens? For all of the 7 deadly sins, Hugh of St. Victor has this elaborate scheme about how they are combated, basically. So if you're interested in one particular sin, you might want to check on the 5 sevens by Hugh of St. Victor. So we have a sin like pride, superbia. Okay, so for Hugh, there are 7 parts of the Lord's Prayer, you know, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name, this prayer. And so the part for pride, the part of the prayer that we should think about is hallowed be your name, not my name. There's a gift of the Holy Spirit we're all given to combat each of the 7 deadly sins, and apparently it's the spirit of the fear of the Lord. There's a virtue which we can all practice to fight the deadly sins, and the particular virtue for pride, unsurprisingly, is humility, or poverty of spirit, which is to say, don't believe that your spirit is like really rich and all the rest of it, but to accept total poverty. We'll come back to that a little bit later. And then finally, the beatitude, what waits at the end? Fight pride and you end up inheriting the kingdom of heaven. So, you know, through this circle. So the idea, of course, is that it's very ironic, you know, it's deeply ironic, right, that you think you deserve to, for example, take over a kingdom. For example, I should be the rightful ruler of Rome. Brutus is full of pride. It takes over the kingdom, or tries to. You know, this is like, you know, he loses it by doing it. For Augustine and for Hugh of St. Victor, right, you know, you ironically and perversely gain the thing that you think you're going to get through pride through humility. You get the kingdom of heaven. Okay, it makes sense, I hope. Let's just end with St. Thomas, because I think he's going to be a ray of sunshine for you. If you don't like this medieval way of thinking, if you're already seeing some horrible, perverse problem with medieval thoughts, maybe St. Thomas, maybe, I'm not promising anything, but maybe St. Thomas is more familiar to us. St. Thomas Aquinas was, as I said earlier, the original university professor, like the authentic one. But he's not someone who is led by he's not a blind Christian theorist, right? He's not like, I must go with my heart. He is someone who used reason and was not frightened to use reason on the biggest questions. Does God exist? Thomas has a proof for why God exists, which he uses what we might call empirical science to prove. It almost works as well. Maybe it does work. Thomas proves God through science. So he's not someone who's going to say, oh, I believe in God because I know God is there anyway, so I don't need to question it because there are some things we shouldn't question. Thomas believes that you should question everything, up until the points that are where you cannot use reason. Like, you know, you can imagine what those are. But anyway, Thomas Aquinas turns his focus to pride in the Summa Theologiae, and we get this. It comes up, and this is an interesting definition. A person is said to be proud because he wishes to appear above what he really is. And that's a quote, for he who wishes to overstep beyond what he is proud. Now, right reason requires that every person's will should tend to that which is proportionate to him. Do you remember this from modern psychology, this idea of proportion being important? Okay, so it's not just I should be nothing. I should respect myself in proportion to what is reasonable. But there's that word reason coming. Therefore, it is evident that pride denotes something opposed to right reason. And this shows it to have the character of sin. Right, okay. So why is pride a pathology for Thomas Aquinas? Well, if you remember, in modern psychology, pride is a pathology because it leads to a corrosion of social relations and because it's not proportionate. For someone like Hugh of St. Victor, it's much more of a mystical sense. Pride is pathological because it does not respect the fact that all of your being comes from God. But this is not that answer. This answer is more like the proportionate one of modern psychology. It's against reason, right reason. If you're proud, right, if you overstep beyond what you are, then this is not proportionate to what you are. Let me explain this with 3 circles because I think it might work. If you're not sure what's going on, hopefully this diagram will make it clear. So, your estimation of yourself, your self-determination, what you believe yourself to be and to be capable of, has some degree of relationship, an important relationship with what is reasonable. So, for Thomas, there are 2 things, 2 traps that we can fall into. Pride is just one of them on this spectrum of self-belief and self-determination. The other is pusillanimity, weakness of will. The pusillanimous soul is someone, right, who is confronted with something and just, yeah, I suppose so. Is unable to assert their will, believes themselves to be so little that they are ineffective in social relations. What does that even look like? Well, imagine you're qualified to be a professor or whatever, not a professor. You're qualified to be leading local government, all right, in Chimin. You're qualified for the job. You did 20 years of experience. You've had all of the right positions. There is no other candidate who can do it. If you then step into the post and say, I can't do this, guys. I'm not worthy. I know all of my power really derives from some higher source. This is where it gets a bit dodgy. But anyway, you see the point there is you're weak. You're nothing. You're not actually using what is proportionate to what should be reasonable. For Thomas, this would be just as much of a sin. You're not self-determined enough. You're not you do not estimate yourself enough. Pride is when it goes beyond reason. It steps above. You believe you are more than you are really. I can't be certain, but I hope that this is a much more familiar view of what pride might be. I dare say it, but this is a model of pride and its pathology where you can remove the word God. You can remove Christianity from this, and you can still have a Thomas Aquinas, a Thomist opinion of pride. This is interesting. Thomas Aquinas used the philosophy of Aristotle, and I think this idea actually comes from Aristotle obliquely. And you might want to look at Aristotle's idea of modesty in the Nicomachean Ethics to find out more about that. Okay, guys, those are some medieval intellectual foundations. There are obviously more. I hope these are useful to you in thinking. If you're going to focus on pride, or you're going to focus on envy, or lust, or gluttony, or whatever your sin is you're going to do for your group work, sim portfolio, it's worth checking the intellectual foundations of this stuff because there's a lot of very interesting tensions. As you can see, obviously, there is no medieval view of pride. There is a Thomas Aquinas view, there is an Augustine view, there is a Hugh of St. Victor view. They're all fantastically rich in their own right, and they all have very interesting tensions with one another. But nevertheless, of course, there is a pattern. In the last bit of this lecture, and this we will be brief enough, I know we have 2 lectures, we're going to look at hubris. And this is a particular motif, right? We're going to go back to Lucifer in a way, but we're going to look at this particular motif of pride becoming before a fall. Being proud, estimating yourself too high, and then plunging down to the lowest depths. This motif of pride, which I hope is not familiar from any of our lives, but we all experience some version of this, even if it's in a small way, this idea of hubris. We're going to begin with Simon Magus. You're going to read a little bit of this for our seminar discussion. This is the story of a magician, Simon Magus, who appears in Rome when St. Peter is in Rome. This is after Christ is dead. It's while Peter is Bishop of Rome. And he is someone who claims to perform all of these magic tricks. In Rome, he levitates in the air. It's almost, wrong way. I used to be able to do it. No, I couldn't. But, there's some trick that some magicians like to do, which they do this today. No, right, so Simon Magus he used magic, necromancy, diabolical forces to pretend to fly. And everyone was amazed. And the idea was that people would stop and worship Simon Magus. But actually he plunges out of the sky because it all goes wrong. So Peter says a prayer, Simon Magus plunges to his humiliation. I think he gets really badly hurt, actually. It's a little bit ethically strange that Peter goes through with that. You obviously see the parallel, I'm imagining, with ancient Greece, with Icarus, the story, and Daedalus. Icarus, building his wings, claiming he can fly, flying to the sun, falling down, the wings melt. There's also the story of Arachne, who believed that she could spin most beautifully, and that she could spin faster than the gods, and then she was turned into a spider. As a lesson. That's a lesson in pride. Anyway, the Simon Magus story, it captures the imagination in different parts of the Middle Ages. The Simon Magus story pops up again, and you're going to read the Golden Legend, which is where this story comes up again. In the middle of the story of St. Peter, they just choose to devote 4 pages to this in the 13th century. So it becomes popular again. This is classic hubris. Believe you're above others, believe you can deceive people, trick people, that they might worship you, and then you fall. The obvious, and now we move out of the Middle Ages, Lucifer was the obvious other example, but I wanted to just talk about Faustus, because this is the big legend of this, which persists into the modern world. And I'm sure you're familiar, but in Dr. Faustus, it's the story. It is based on a real person, by the way, a real person who did actually provide some kind of magic. There's record that there's a doctor, George Faustus, in Germany, who provides a horoscope for a bishop in the 1500s. So there is some legend attached to some figure who apparently he was found with his neck twisted round 5 times, which was a sign that he'd made a pact with the devil, and the devil then twisted his neck. So this is a great and interesting story. The first writer who picks it up is the English writer, the spy, actually, Christopher Marlowe, in the 1590s. It's a long text. He finishes it decades later. It's the story of, and in this story, Faustus is a scholar, and he makes, as I'm sure you know, a pact with Mephistopheles, this demon who appears, who promises him that he'll have all these magical powers and he'll have all of his heart's desires. He'll sleep with all these beautiful women, including Helen of Troy, or kisses her. In exchange, in 24 years, he'll die and his soul will go to hell. And, he takes it. Was it a stupid deal? He takes the deal and he performs all these tricks, but he even stops using them to the best extent. Like, the trickery just becomes like little magic tricks and people will sort of clap. But it's kind of pathetic. The devil appears, Lucifer appears at one point, and actually this is where the 7 deadly sins appear in this play. Lucifer shows Faustus the 7 deadly sins and says, look at these, and they all say their bit one by one. Pride is at the beginning, and still Faustus doesn't change his mind. It's almost like a big joke on Faustus. He knows what he's doing is wrong. He knows he's sacrificing his soul so he can have some extra power in this life, but still he doesn't repent. He doesn't repent until this last moment of the play when the gates of hell open up and all the demons come out and Mephistopheles says, look, it's time to take your soul. He doesn't repent. And actually, this is quite shocking. This is a really shocking version of this story because there's no hope for the proud soul of Faustus. He just gets dragged down to hell, and it's a really ghastly ending. And in this Globe production, Lucifer then appears on stage with his enormous wings. Delighted that he's won another soul, his pride swells. But of course, where does it get him? This is the popular version of the tale, right? The Marlowe one. If we're interested in historical tensions, for Marlowe, there's no redemption. Faustus goes down to hell. It's his pride that got him there. It was his choice. Goethe is the next one to look at. And Faust. Another text which is tortured. Goethe, I don't know if you know much about Goethe, romantic writer, wrote billions and billions of words. He spent like 30 years of his life, maybe more, writing Faust. And he changed his mind about it. And maybe that's because in his early life, Goethe was quite sort of a German patriot, if you like, or wanted to write a myth of the German pseudo-nation, proto-nation. By the end of his life, Goethe was much more of a European kind of pan-national idealist. But anyway, Goethe's Faust is this interesting version of this. And it's identical in many ways. There's slight differences. Goethe's Faust, the Dr. Faust, does not ask for Mephistopheles to appear. He does not ask for these powers. He's tempted. So that's one slight difference. The major difference, of course, is that Goethe's Faust survives. He makes his penance, and he does not get dragged down to hell. Look at what he says, and we'll talk about the implications of that in just 1 second. Just to give you a quote from Goethe. "In me there are two souls, alas, and their division tears my life in two." You might think about St. Paul talking about like these two things between God and self. "One loves the world, it clutches her, it binds itself to her, clinging with furious lust. The other longs to soar beyond the dust into the realm of high ancestral minds." The problem with Goethe's Faust, you might say, is that might not be the problem for Goethe. The problem is not wanting to go beyond. This could be Christianized. This could be moralized. "I long to soar beyond the dust into the realm of high ancestral minds." Well, some of the medieval monks would agree. And the answer, they would say, is sit in a monastery for 40 years praying. That's how you'll soar with the minds. So it's not necessarily hubristic in itself. But nevertheless, of course, it's still part of the story. It's a hubris, and of course, Faust in Goethe's story has to confront that he will be damned, and he knows he'll die in 20 odd years or whatever. But he makes his repentance and he's saved. And you might see a distinction in how hubris is dealt with in our culture through this. Because after all, Goethe writes in the Enlightenment, in the intellectual moment of that Enlightenment, where is it so bad? Is it so bad in the Enlightenment to want to do better than what you have? Is it so bad to want the betterment of humanity? You're seeing the beginnings of that kind of thought that you can't help but see there's some sympathy with Faust. You see it there, you know. He longs to soar beyond the dust into the realm of high ancestral minds. There's sympathy with that. Goethe understands. Goethe wants to do the same. It's not necessarily damnable. For Marlowe, it was damnable and stupid to want to be better than everyone else. You know, and he suffers for it. He's an idiot. He sees the sins of pride and he doesn't know he's wrong. For Goethe, it's much more complicated. He's tempted to be a proud individual who will be better than others, but it's redeemable because it could be for the betterment of all of the community. He could become a genius like Goethe himself. Frankenstein, I think it's obvious, right? But this is another example of this myth of pride. The pride that you can do God's work for him, that you can make your own human. This is, you know, and you don't need, you know, you are, it's like Prometheus is the subtitle, isn't it? You know, you can take the power of the gods for yourself. And you might think, I know that quite a few of you, I think all of you have, except maybe one or two, have studied this here at SAS. So you're all familiar, and you had the very best teaching for it. So you remember. Okay, so Frankenstein is, you might think, does that end in the redemption of the Doctor, Frankenstein, or not? You think about it. But nevertheless, the difference there is it's a scientific project. And Mary Shelley cannot help, she does not condemn the scientific urge for advance entirely. There's still some residue in there of respect for its awesome power. But nevertheless, I see that also he gets his comeuppance. It's not a divine being he creates, it's a monster. You know, this is important. Ozymandias, written, and you know, if we can have Mary Shelley, we can have Percy Shelley, her husband, who wrote a poem on exactly the same theme. Ozymandias, thinking about hubristic pride. It's just one of those famous lines. "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings." This is, so Shelley went and saw the head of some long forgotten king. You know, and he meditates on the fact that this guy used to be like Lord of everything, and now no one knows his name. He's now like, so what did it mean? What did it mean to like achieve all of those things in his life and think he's the most powerful person when he's dead like the rest of us will be, and nothing like the rest of us will be? So it's a fairly Christian theme. "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains," this is Shelley now, "nothing beside remains round the decay of that colossal wreck. Boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." A poem that reflects on this, the pointlessness, the stupidity of hubris, that what's it all for? You can aim to outstrip everyone, be the most powerful, and yet you become sand like everyone else. We'll pick that up in a second. I suppose we should say something about the more positive aspects of pride or hubris, and some voices in the modern philosophical world who who would like to strip away the Christian tradition, who would see the actual pathology. If there's a pathology associated with pride, it's that we're all too hung up on the fact that it's a sin, and that actually we should strip this out of our thinking. And of course, a figure for that would be Nietzsche. Beyond Good and Evil, we might have Aphorism 71. These are obviously enigmatic, require interpretation, but still we can quote it. If you still experience the stars as something over you, you still don't have the eyes of a knower. For Nietzsche, it's complicated, but the human can achieve much more than it has been led to believe. It's been enslaved by a certain kind of slave morality. If the human could only access its own will to power, things might be different. Maybe we'll explain it in relation to the concept of the overman, which is briefly expounded in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, but appears throughout his work, the Übermensch or the overman. And there's this distinction between the Übermensch, the overman, and the last man, who Nietzsche condemns, right? And it's important. Whereas the last man, right, seeks to be comfortable with what he already has. Okay, so this is a certain kind of humility, a traditionalism, conservatism that Nietzsche condemns, right? Which is like, you're just satisfied to be like you always have been. You just want to be comfortable. This is the last man. They've lost the will to power. They're no longer humans at their full potential. Humans at their full potential for Nietzsche seek to transcend humanity, okay? But in order to enhance it, it's this critical dimension, which I think comes out through Beyond Good and Evil and Thus Spake Zarathustra in different ways. But it's this idea that actually there's an ethical, social dimension to the Übermensch, the overman. If it looks like hubris, right, believing you're more powerful than any community that's been, but it's not individualistic entirely. There's also a community attached. And it's to enhance the community that people should strive to be more than what they were. So this is a tension, but it's a tension which is important, and I think we inherit this tension, okay? We inherit the tension that says, well, hubristic pride isn't necessarily damnable. We're more like Goethe, I think, in this respect, and we take this from Nietzsche. I think this is more like the common modern assumption, maybe in psychology too. It's not a complete character failing to believe that you want to be better than others. It's just it needs to be tempered by some ethical communal consideration. So Lewis Hamilton wants to be the greatest Formula One driver that's ever lived. If he wins the Russian Grand Prix tomorrow, he will go beyond or equal Michael Schumacher's record. You know, he has reason to want to transcend the limits, but he must do it with respect to the fact that he appreciates he's part of a community. He's part of a network. He's enhancing it. He's transcending what's been done, not just for the sake of Lewis Hamilton, but for the sake of the team, Mercedes, for the sake of the sport, blah, blah, blah. For our entertainment, I don't know. So so if we start to understand hubris as it exists in the contemporary world, we understand that it is tempered by this qualification. It's not an absolute. For Marlowe, it is an absolute. The minute you have committed the sin of pride and you do not repent, you know, you've kind of corroded yourself, your soul. You are damnable. For Goethe, later writers, certainly for Nietzsche, it's not so black and white. Something from hubris can be salvaged. I thought I'd end this bit and basically the lecture on this last, on one great example of hubris in contemporary television, which is, any people seen Breaking Bad, the 5 series? It's a brilliant show. I mean, it really is. I feel like, insofar as literature is concerned, insofar as like we have a modern Hamlet, or it's going a bit far, or Frankenstein, then this is like worthy. It's worthy to be compared with. It's a fantastic piece of work. It's no coincidence. And now you notice here that actually there's an episode in this series called Ozymandias. For those of you who haven't seen the series, it's about one man who's a chemistry teacher who has to he can't afford to pay for his cancer treatment. And so he decides to use his chemical skills to make crack cocaine, right? So he becomes a drug dealer, essentially. And then he becomes higher and higher in the drug dealer chain until he's the most powerful of them all. And then eventually he is brought down. I forget, it's a while since I watched it. But there's an episode called Ozymandias in which Walter White, that's his name, is brought to his knees. He's caught, he's captured, it's all over. And you see they promoted it with the quote from the Shelley poem, "Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." It's no coincidence. The writer and creator of this series, I think it's Vince Gilligan, isn't it? I remember listening to an interview with him where he said, yes, this is actually a morality story. This whole story of Breaking Bad is actually about the sin of pride, which is bizarre. He has a Christian upbringing, so it's not so surprising. But he cites, because they said, well, the question was, when does Walter become evil? Does he become evil? Which is an interesting question. This is over 5 series. He starts just as a chemistry teacher. He ends up like doing terrible things, burning people alive, as I recall, shooting people, even his friends. And the question, when does he become evil? Fascinating answer that Vince Gilligan, the creator, gave. He said the moment he becomes evil is right at the beginning, because when he has this cancer treatment, he needs cancer treatment, his old business partner, who cheated him out of the business, offers to pay for the cancer treatment. And Walter White says, no, I won't take your money. And it's quite surprising, but Vince Gilligan says this is the moment he becomes evil. And this, as a medieval scholar, I understand. And now you, after this lecture, understand completely why. He believed he could do it for himself. It's the moment that he says, I don't need anyone else. Me, can do this for myself. We might see this as pretty harsh. For Gilligan, this is a morality story about pride, which ends with Ozymandias, like the old king, just turning to dust and sand. Everything he thought was power was nothing. But it begins, much like a medieval morality story, the pride in believing you don't need others, that you're not attached to a community, believing you're a stream that can just say, we don't need the river. That was the problem. I'm going to end with just some questions for you to think about as you reflect on this lecture and as you come to those readings that we're going to do. Under what circumstances and with what justifications has pride been pathologized? Has it been described or imagined as a problem, as something not right? What kind of pathology would be another? Physical, mental, social, political? Under what circumstances and with what justifications has pride been pathologized? Augustine of Hippo, it's the circumstances, the justification is Adam, the first sin, and the kind of pathology is like total human moral pathology. For the psychologists, well, pathologize insofar as it doesn't make for happy groups of people. How has the threshold between pride and hubris, or with hubris, been shifted, do you think? If you were going to do a portfolio on pride, well, it's a fascinating question. When is hubris forgivable? When is it not? When is it attached to other things? When is it, arguably, for Breaking Bad, hubris, we're back to the Middle Ages. Hubris is damnable, It's irredeemable. It's more like Marlowe, less like Goethe. How has that threshold changed? When does it change? Under what circumstances? What kind of writing? Is it fair to make generalizations about medieval versus modern pride? Hopefully, I've undermined your sense that there is a medieval intellectual tradition that you can unify. Can medieval philosophy be read in dialogue with modern pride and vice versa? Hopefully Breaking Bad gives you an example of that. We're basically out of time. I just thought for the very last moment of reflection, I'd put this image back up and maybe give you an opportunity to reflect yourselves about what kind of tensions between pride, hubris, self-estimation, self-determination are being seen in this image. This is the kind of moment in American history, this moment in particular now, where actually debates about pride, hubris, and everything else are really fruitful, enormous, growing. This kind of moment was seen as hubristic by some commentators who did not like the getting on the knee. They thought it was, just for a simple point of view, some thought, well, it's not respectful. It's not respectful towards the pride we should have in the nation. It's almost like the pride in some other cause goes beyond the nation. So that kind of pathology relates to a certain kind of definition of what nationalism should be, what the nation should be, what individuals' relationship in America with their national myth and everything else should be. You should stand when there's a national anthem. You shouldn't put anything above it, arguably. On the other hand, some have argued that this was, a most wonderful version of what a non-pathological pride should look like. Pathological pride is blind, arguably, some would say. It's blind to always be proud of your nation, to always say our nation is great. really, this is much more of a noble sense of I accept that being proud to be American also entails the fact that we're not quite there yet as what America should be. I'll be proud, I'll stand up and put my hand on my heart when there's no longer any police brutality. That would be one interpretation of this. What about pride and hubris in the individual? Well, some see this as a horribly individualistic act about publicity, and some see the opposite. It's community-oriented. I leave it with you to think about how we could apply Hugh of St. Victor to this moment, or Thomas Aquinas to this moment. Right, guys, there's a break. I'll see you all in 20 minutes. Have a good break. Okay.